Karen bulldozed my farm entrance at 2 a.m. She didn't know a surveillance drone caught everything. Part 1. They thought no one would see. That 2 a.m. was still enough to bury a crime under moonlight. That rural land meant fewer witnesses. What they didn't know, what she didn't know, was that I had eyes in the sky. I'm Jonah Merrick, fourth-generation rancher and former systems analyst for the U.S. Department of Energy. After retiring from federal service, I came back to reclaim the land that raised me 20 acres of rough-edge Wyoming pasture that's been in my family since 1897. I raise working horses, run cattle, and train at-risk youth from the county center in sustainable land management. I'm not flashy. I wear boots older than most HOA rules, but I track everything: soil pH, rainfall, feed patterns, and after one too many fence cuttings last year, I added one more thing: drones. Legal, registered, and silent. A full aerial perimeter surveillance system designed not for snooping, but for safety. I never expected it to capture a crime. Certainly not her. The conflict began 6 months before the bulldozer. Karen Wessler. If you looked her up, you'd find a paper trail of mile-long real estate licenses, property preservation firms, HOA consulting contracts in 3 counties, all technically legal, all suspicious. When she arrived at Cold Creek Hollow with her clipboard and perfectly white dog, I figured she was just another outsider who thought sagebrush was a weed. But she came with a plan. "We're formalizing the Hollow's look," she said one afternoon at the general store. "To attract responsible families." I stared at her from behind the seed catalog. "We've got responsible families. You just don't like how they drive." She smiled like a blade. "Gravel's outdated." 3 weeks later, flyers showed up on everyone's fence posts. Cold Creek Rural Management Coalition, Meeting Tuesday Coalition. There had never been an HOA here. No charter, no vote, just families. Dirt roads, honor systems. But Karen wanted control, and she'd found a loophole. She targeted new residents, first those who didn't know the land's history, convinced them she was organizing a protective land use committee, promised them safety, order, rising property values. Then came the rules. No fencing over 4 feet, no animals within 200 feet of a main road. All driveway entrances must be uniform and HOA approved. None of them voted on, all of them enforced. She started with warnings, then fines, then threats of liens signed with a title that didn't exist: President, Cold Creek Rural Board. I laughed at first, until I realized folks were actually paying. When I got my first notice, it was printed in thick ink on fake letterhead. "Your private entry drive exceeds width standards and appears non-compliant." Non-compliant, I'd widened that entrance last spring to accommodate a delivery of fencing posts. My gate sat 23 feet from the main road and had been there since my grandfather carved it out with hand tools. I called her. She answered like she'd been waiting. "It's for your own good," she said. "A clean look benefits everyone. If you refuse to adjust it voluntarily, we'll take further steps," such as she hung up. That was in May. By September, I'd received 4 more notices. I responded to each with a scanned deed, photographs, and a link to the county's non-HOA land designation map. I also attached a copy of the 1949 variance that declared Cold Creek Hollow community governed by owner covenant. No reply. Until that night. It was October 12th, 2:03 a.m. I was in bed when my phone buzzed. The drone feed app. Motion detected gate 1. I rolled over, half asleep, assuming it was a deer, but the outline was wrong. Too square, too loud. I tapped the feed and froze. 2 vehicles, a flatbed and a compact SUV. A man in a reflective vest waved as a small bulldozer backed down my easement. The second figure, the driver of the SUV, paced beside the fence line, holding something that glinted under the drone light. It was Karen, in boots, gloves, and a white scarf. The drone caught her waving the machine forward. It rammed the gate posts, ripped out the archway, dragged the beams like bones across the gravel, flattening it into smooth, sterile nothing. 20 seconds later, She sprayed something on the wreckage. I enhanced the footage. It was marking paint, compliant. I didn't sleep. I didn't even breathe. At 6:17 a.m., I walked outside and found nothing left of the gate but splinters and tire ruts. No note, no apology, just silence and mud. I drove straight to the sheriff, dropped the USB drive on the desk. He watched 10 seconds of footage and muttered, "What in hell?" But his voice shifted. "Jonah, this footage is incredible, but it's a civil dispute. She destroyed property. She'll claim authority. Some paperwork. It'll be tied up for months." I leaned in. She used equipment, machinery, no permit, no ownership. That's trespass with intent. The sheriff nodded. "I'll escalate it to county, but you know how these things go. Karen's connected. Real estate board. Friends in the assessor's office." He didn't say it, but I heard it. She might get away with this, unless I didn't let her. By noon, I had the full drone sequence edited and watermarked. By 3 p.m., I sent it to every neighbor in Cold Creek Hollow, along with a map showing their own legal rights. By 4 p.m., Michelle Vargas, longtime horse trainer and mother of two, called to say Karen had threatened her over her barn roof color. By 6 p.m., 23 residents had joined a private thread. At 9:42 p.m., my phone buzzed again. "We want to fight back. What do we do next?" I tapped the feed again. The drone had already lifted again. Quiet, watching, and Karen had no idea. The sky was on our side now. Part 2. Gravel doesn't forget. You can smooth it, rake it, flatten it, but it remembers the weight that passed over it. Tire, hooves, steel tracks in the dark. And that night, it remembered Karen. But beneath the gravel, beneath the twisted wood and fake bylaws, something deeper was buried. And I was ready to dig. The day after the bulldozing, the sheriff made a courtesy visit to Karen's rented office space near the county courthouse. She wasn't there, but her assistant, a teenager who looked ready to quit, handed over a stack of community protection declarations bound with a red ribbon. The pages were full of vague legalese, referencing non-existent subchapters, unsigned resolutions, and a revised rural overlay plan that had never been recorded with the county. "This is all she left," the kid said. "She told me she was preparing for backlash. She knew we'd come." Meanwhile, the footage spread like wildfire. The aerial clip of Karen waving down a bulldozer under the drone's infrared light hit local news within 24 hours. Then national outlets picked it up first as a quirky property dispute, then as something more sinister. The hashtag started trending. Jock Cold Creek Drone. Mash Fake HOA. Jock's Gravelgate. I didn't push it, didn't post a thing. I didn't have to. The truth was finally louder than her lies, but exposing her wasn't enough. Because in her wreckage, we found layers. I spent 2 nights combing through county land use archives. Karen had submitted at least 6 advisory proposals under different organizational names: Cold Creek Rural Vision, Cold Creek Property Standards Council, Wyoming Livability Board. Each sounded official. None had oversight. Worse, each included the same clause in fine print driveway access to be standardized for emergency service navigation. Private drives exceeding 14 feet may be adjusted in line with visual and navigational flow. In other words, she was trying to convert private property into controlled access routes, all under the fake banner of public safety. The goal easement claims she was prepping the land for resale, Michelle Vargas said when we gathered around my kitchen table. If she proves the entrances are compliant with her code, she can flip the lots at premium. It hit me then. She wasn't building a community. She was building leverage. Fake enforcement, destroy property, flatten resistance, rezone, sell, walk away. And she would have gotten away with it if not for the sky. That night, Drone Unit 3 picked up activity at the edge of the Johnson property. 2 men in a white van unloading signposts. I zoomed in, future site of Cold Creek Community Commons Est. 2025. A commons they hadn't even voted. Johnson called me 5 minutes later. They drilled holes on my side. I didn't authorize a thing. Don't worry, I said, pulling on my jacket. We'll meet them with the truth. By morning, our underground network had tripled. Retired welders, school teachers, truckers, single moms, ranchers like me, people who'd been silenced or shamed or scared by Karen's false flags and real threats. But now we were done being quiet. We started with signage. Dozens of hand-painted boards lined the county road by the weekend. This land has no HOA. Our boundaries are real, your board is not. Drone footage, legal action pending. Karen tried to call it harassment. Her lawyer filed a cease and desist, but we had witnesses, footage, soil records, deed lines. More importantly, we had momentum. And then the state got involved. A copy of the footage had reached the Wyoming Office of Rural Land Integrity. A senior investigator, Elena Sharp, drove down herself. She met me at sunrise, right by the edge of the flattened driveway. "Tell me everything," she said. I handed her a folder. She read in silence. "Then how soon can you gather statements from everyone she touched?" "Already started." Her eyes flicked toward the sky. "And the drone always watching?" She smiled. "Good. We're going to need all the angles." Karen went silent. No press statements, no denials, no public appearances. But her lawyer made one mistake. They filed a motion to formally incorporate the Cold Creek Rural Management Coalition, claiming community consensus. The filing required signatures. There were 18 names. We checked each one. 7 were out of state, 3 were duplicated, 1 was dead. Only 7 were actual Cold Creek residents. We printed the list, posted it to the Root House bulletin board, taped it to mailboxes, sent it to the county, handed it to the news. Karen's coalition crumbled. But even as her paper empire collapsed, we kept building. Not fences, not lawsuits, community. We held weekend cookouts, shared equipment, helped rebuild the gate she flattened. We even started a Cold Creek Land Circle monthly discussions on real land law, heritage, and sustainable boundaries. And every meeting ended with a toast to eyes in the sky and boots on the ground. Karen tried to strike back one last time. She filed a slander suit against me personally, but she made a fatal mistake. Because the morning that court filing hit my mailbox, Drone Unit 4 captured footage of her removing survey flags from Johnson's West Line. And that was tampering with county-marked property lines. A felony. Elena filed charges. The state backed the case, and Karen, she was arrested 2 weeks later at 2:17 a.m. Same hour she'd flattened my gate. Only this time, the light in the sky was brighter, and it belonged to us. Part 3. You can bulldoze a path. You can paint over property lines. You can even forge signatures and claim authority. But out here in real land, the field always reclaims itself. It just takes time and enough people willing to plant what comes next. Karen's arrest changed everything. No more flyers on fence posts. No more early morning inspections. No more clipboard walk-bys with veiled threats about visual flow. For the first time in months, the hollow could breathe. But that didn't mean the work was done. Because the soil she poisoned still had to be turned over. The county confirmed it within days of the arrest. Karen had falsified over a dozen land use claims, misrepresented her coalition in multiple filings, and submitted fraudulent easement applications for properties that weren't hers. They revoked every fake restriction she'd imposed. Her so-called Cold Creek Rural Management Coalition dissolved. But just like a crushed weed grows back tougher if you ignore it, her damage needed a full community response. So we got to work. We started with the gate, the one she flattened under the blade of a midnight bulldozer. The arch was beyond repair. The cedar beams were splintered, soaked, and useless. So I invited everyone back to the ranch, not just to rebuild, but to reclaim. We called it the Cold Creek Raising, old school, tools by hand, coffee in steel thermoses, kids handing out screws. The same field Karen had tried to sanitize and standardize now teemed with life, dust, laughter. We rebuilt the entrance bigger, stronger with everyone's hand in it. Someone brought a welder, someone else brought stone. The new arch stood 15 feet tall. On its crossbeam, we carved no trespass, no tyranny. This land knows who owns it. And that wasn't the only thing we raised. Michelle proposed an idea I hadn't expected. Let's turn Karen's seized parcel into a learning pasture. I blinked. For what? For everything she tried to kill. Community trust, land education, stewardship. Let's make it public, real. So we took what she stole and gave it back. That fall, the Cold Creek Commons opened on the site of Karen's old rented lot. 3-acre teaching field, seed library, grazing demo plot, volunteer-built timber hall with solar lighting and open walls. Kids could learn how to read topo maps. Adults could apply for small plot support. Retired neighbors ran weekend classes on orchard pruning, mule harnessing, fence repair. And I taught them how to run aerial perimeter defense legally and ethically, so no one ever got blindsided like we had again. We called it Land Eyes 101. The hollow had shifted. We weren't just farmers and ranchers anymore. We were guardians of clarity, and the land began to show it. Where Karen's bulldozer had scraped away roots in history, native grasses grew back stronger. The old creek line swelled after a good rain. Fences were mended. Soil was turned. And trust, slow but steady, was seeded back into the ground. But Karen wasn't done with us. Not entirely. From jail, she filed one last motion to suppress all drone footage on grounds of privacy invasion. Her lawyer argued the drones had recorded her without consent. We countered FAA registration logs, flight permissions, time-stamped overlays, boundary maps. But most importantly, the footage was recorded over my land. And when she stepped onto my easement with that machine, she surrendered any claim to invisibility. The judge's ruling was short, firm, and final. You do not get to destroy property under cover of darkness and then demand darkness remain your shield. The footage was admissible. Her trial moved forward. The charges: trespassing, property destruction, affront to fraud, attempted land misrepresentation, harassment. The sentence: 18 months probation, $62,000 in restitution, lifetime ban from HOA advisory boards in the state. She walked out of the courthouse not in cuffs, but with nowhere to go. And as she passed the new community pasture on her way out of Cold Creek Hollow, I watched from a distance. She paused. For a second, I thought she might speak, but the only sound was wind in the grass she once called too wild. I didn't celebrate. I walked the new fence line, checked the corners, listened to the hum of insects, and I whispered to the earth. She tried to make this a battlefield, but it stayed a farm, and the field outlasted her. By the end of that month, Drone Unit 3 went offline, not from sabotage, because I powered it down. We didn't need constant eyes anymore. We had each other. That's how the land reclaims itself. Not with vengeance, but with rooted remembering. And the knowledge that when someone breaks a line, you build something better in its place. Part 4. Some scars stay in the soil, others drift above it. But out here in Cold Creek, we've learned to read both, because the sky remembers. And now, under that same sky she tried to hide beneath, we were writing something new. It had been 5 months since Karen's sentencing. The hollow had settled into a new rhythm, one that didn't begin with HOA warnings or end in backdoor threats. Life had gotten real again. Cattle moved unbothered across open fencing. Kids rode bikes along trails she once tried to pave for uniformity. But every now and then, someone still looked up and said, "Can you believe we caught her with a drone?" And I'd nod quiet, firm, because it wasn't about the drone. It was about what we'd refused to let vanish under the dark. The sky over Cold Creek used to feel distant, too wide, too silent, too easy to take for granted. Now it was our ceiling, not a threat, a watchtower, not surveillance, stewardship. After the case closed, I was approached by a small group from the University of Wyoming's Land Tech Initiative. They'd read about the incident and asked if I'd consider letting them set up a teaching lab on the Cold Creek Commons site. Students could learn drone regulation, land surveying, ag tech, all from the place that proved how powerful responsible tools can be. I agreed. On one condition, they don't just study how to fly, they study why we watch. The first session started in spring, 10 students, wide eyes, quiet hands. I showed them where my old gate had stood, where the blade had first struck the gravel, where the drone had hovered, recording not just a crime, but a choice. Technology doesn't make you the authority. I told them, it makes you accountable. Use it to protect, never to pretend you own what you don't. They wrote it down. One of them, Shay, a Navajo girl with a pilot's license, asked if she could name the new drone. I said sure. She called it Hojo, a Diné word meaning harmony, balance, beauty. It stuck. Meanwhile, Cold Creek kept evolving. The root house expanded. We added a rainwater cistern and solar ventilation. Michelle started organizing night gatherings, star maps, meteor watching, even drone light exhibitions. One summer evening, I watched 50 people stand in silence as Hojo lit up a wide arc above the pastures, tracing the old fence lines in soft white light. Kids gasped, elders cried, and me, I just stood there thinking, this is what Karen never understood. You don't protect land by controlling it. You protect it by sharing the sky. But not everyone wanted to move on. A few old allies of Karen tried reviving the Standards Committee under a new name, the Cold Creek Conservancy. Same rules, same claims. But they made one mistake. They sent the proposals to the county without vetting the public records first. And when the land registry clerk opened the file, she saw the footage. Not just of the bulldozing, but of the repair. Not just of the trespass, but of the rebuild. That footage wasn't a weapon. It was a memory. And memory, once recorded, is damn hard to rewrite. The proposal was rejected, unanimously. Elena Sharp, the same state investigator who helped build the original case, came back to Cold Creek to present us with something unexpected. A state recognition model rural resilience community. Turns out, they'd watched how we handled it all, how we moved from crisis to clarity, from surveillance to stewardship. She handed me a certificate. I almost laughed. You're giving me a plaque for using a drone. She smiled. We're giving you a plaque for not just using it, for why you used it, and for everything you planned it after. That night, under the clearest sky in months, we held a celebration. No fireworks, just bonfires, laughter, and one final flight. I launched Hojo at dusk. Let her hover above the commons, above the rebuilt gate, above the fields that Karen once tried to standardize. Then I flipped the LED to green, and the entire hollow glowed. A single shape in the sky, a circle, no edges, no fences, just open space and the people who belong in it. That's the story of the sky over Cold Creek. A sky that watched us lose, then rise. That captured the moment someone tried to redraw our boundaries and ended up exposing their own. And through it all, we learned the sky sees everything. So make sure you can live with what it sees. Part 5, people forget. Laws shift, faces age, footsteps vanish in the wind. But land remembers. It remembers who walks with care and who walks like they own it. In Cold Creek Hollow, for all its weathered history and quiet scars, was finally remembering the right things again. A year had passed since the gate came down in the middle of the night, since we found Karen with drone footage and community resolve, since we chose to rebuild, not just fences, but trust. I wasn't the same man who watched his gravel path torn apart under moonlight. Neither was Cold Creek, and neither was the land beneath our boots. In early spring, I was walking fence line with Riley, my youngest, 10 years old and already riding solo. She kicked at the edge of the rebuilt entry gate and asked, "Dad, is this where they thought they could just come in and take it?" I nodded, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. "Huh," she grinned. "No," I said, smiling. They didn't know what they were stepping on, because they'd mistaken dirt for weakness. They forgot it had roots, history, memory. They didn't understand that land listens even when people stop speaking up for it. That spring, the Cold Creek teaching pasture finished its first full cycle. We rotated classes in livestock rotation and grazing ethics, agtech infrastructure, drone compliance and mapping, indigenous land history and stewardship. The local school district even assigned credit. But it wasn't just the kids learning. We had elders come out with dusty photo boxes, war vets sharing how their great-grandparents split fence posts by hand. One woman brought a faded journal from 1901, her great-aunt's log of every plant ever found in the hollow. We scanned it, preserved it, printed copies for the Commons Library. The past wasn't just honored, it was rooted again. In the place where Karen once tried to install her visual uniformity plan, wildflowers bloomed. People let their lawns grow native. Birdsong returned louder. You could smell sage in the morning breeze again. It was like the land had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. But healing isn't just aesthetic. We needed structure to prevent future poison. So Michelle and I, along with a few others, drafted the Cold Creek Cooperative Land Charter. It wasn't an HOA. It didn't fine people. It didn't impose aesthetic judgment. It simply laid out three values: stewardship over appearance, truth over fear, community over control. It passed unanimously. When the state released its annual report on land disputes and rural legal integrity, our story took up an entire section. Underneath the title where the drone saw truth, the land replanted it. The footage of Karen's bulldozing became case study material. But it wasn't about her anymore. It was about us. I stood before that new class of drone ethics students and said, the biggest lie Karen told wasn't on paper. It was in her footsteps. She walked like she'd never be caught. But the land caught her, because the land always knows who belongs. Karen's name eventually faded from our day-to-day. She moved out of state, tried to apply for a property advisory board job in Nevada. She was rejected. Her record followed her. We didn't cheer. We didn't mock. We just moved on. Because the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's peace. On the one-year anniversary of the gate raising, we held a dusk gathering. We lit lantern, grilled over mesquite. Children recited poems under the arch. And above us, Hojo circled once in silent green. At the end of the night, I planted one more post, small, modest, beside the gate. A single quote, carved into reclaimed wood. Let no one mistake silence for surrender, or soil for emptiness. The land remembers. So must we. And then I walked back inside. No fear, no fight, just roots beneath my feet, and the calm that comes when the earth you stand on knows you stood up for it. The end.